Hello, and thanks for taking the time to view my digital hyperwall presentation. My name is Alexey Shiklomanov. I'm a research scientist with the Biospheric Sciences Laboratory at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, and I'm currently one of the project scientists for NASA's Earth Data and Information System project, which is the group that oversees the archiving and distribution of NASA's Earth science datasets. What I'll be showing you today is the result of 3 pilot studies that took place over the course of 6 months earlier this year, collectively called the Earth Information System. The point of these pilot studies was to show what we can accomplish when we have NASA's science experts, data scientists, and software engineers work together in a cloud computing environment to do some cool new science with clear societal implications. So before we dive into that, I wanted to start with this picture, which shows what we at NASA are best known for, our space-based missions. We have lots of satellites that look at our sun, other planets in our solar system, and beyond, probing the depths of the universe. But, as many of you are aware, NASA and its partner agencies, both in the US and internationally, have a large fleet of satellites, shown here, that look down at our own planet, measuring all kinds of things about our atmosphere, land surface, and ocean. NASA collects the raw data from these missions, processes these data, and releases them to anyone in the world to use, free of charge. And combined with data we collect from airplanes and on the ground, NASA's Earth Science Data System comprises roughly 12,000 datasets with a combined volume of around 34 petabytes. So another thing NASA's Earth Science program does is fill in the gaps between these datasets with models, basically computer representations of our understanding of how the atmosphere, land, and ocean work. What you're looking at here is a representation of all the datasets that are assimilated into one of NASA's Earth System models, the Goddard Earth Observing System, or GEOS model, for one 6-hour period on December 10, 2014. And you can see swaths from orbiting satellites, instruments mounted on commercial aircraft, and data from many ground networks. This is a monumental volume of very different data products represented on this figure. And again, individually, these data sets each give an incomplete and often biased picture of the Earth system. But when we combine them with our physical understanding of the systems, we can generate products that are not only complete in space and time, but also easier for people to understand and use. For example, many of the satellites here measure radiance, basically the brightness of the Earth in a specific region of the electromagnetic spectrum, for a specific moment in time. But that's not usually what people care about. And so what people actually care about is global temperature and how it's changing. What you are seeing here are temperature differences in degrees Celsius relative to the reference period 1951 to 1980. The data center here is GISTEMP, produced by the Goddard Institute for Space Sciences in New York City, which combines weather stations, sea surface temperature records, and satellite observations. This animation clearly shows both the overall global trend of greater warming and also how that warming varies across space and time. This is a much clearer picture than anything you can get from a raw satellite observation. And so the motivation for the Earth Information System project, though, was to take another step beyond this. People are slightly more interested in something like temperature change than satellite radiance, but they're a lot more interested in local scale impacts. Will their area flood during the next big storm? Will the air in their area be unsafe to breathe because of smoke from fires? Will there be enough water for their crops this season? These kinds of questions require a greater level of integration of data models and scientific understanding. And that's exactly what we tried to do with the Earth Information System pilot studies. As I said before, we conducted 3 pilot studies in parallel over a 6-month period, one on sea level change, one on fires, and one on freshwater. Here, I'm going to give a glimpse into each of these studies, starting with sea level change. So I'll play this animation one more time, and as you can see, polar regions are warming significantly faster than the global average. One reason that's bad news is that polar regions have a lot of ice sheets, and when it gets warmer, these ice sheets melt, and the water runs off into the oceans. So if we zoom in on the Greenland Ice Sheet, we see this quite clearly. On the left is a map of Greenland, colored according to loss in ice mass change relative to 2002. With white, meaning no loss relative to 2002, light blue showing a slight gain in ice mass, and yellows and reds showing loss of ice mass. The measurements here are based on the GRACE mission, a really innovative satellite system that by precisely measuring the distance between 2 satellites provides an estimate of the spatial variability in the Earth's gravity, which in turn is driven by variability in the Earth's mass. Here, GRACE is picking up the change in mass of the Greenland ice sheet as parts of the ice sheet melt away into the sea. The little lines show the average flow of the ice based on satellite radar interferometry measurements. And the takeaway here is simple. Over the last 20 years, as the world, and especially the Arctic, have warmed, around 5,000 gigatons of Greenland's ice sheet have melted into the ocean, which amounts to around 280 gigatons per year. So on its own, this has contributed to about 0.03 of an inch of sea level rise per year. Since 2002, just because of Greenland, that means the world's average sea level is now 0.6 of an inch higher. And so often we talk about sea level change in terms of a global average, but in fact, sea level has a lot of spatial variability. This is driven by a complex combination of ocean dynamics, things like currents and tides, and variability in the Earth's gravity field. This map is showing the change in sea level between 1992 to 2019. Areas in red are where sea level has gone up, with the darkest reds indicating a 15 centimeter or about 6-inch increase, and the darkest blues indicate a 15 centimeter or 6-inch decrease. The takeaway is that global average sea level rise doesn't actually tell you a lot about how sea level will impact your community. You need the specific local scale information, much of which is provided by NASA's satellite observations and observations from its partners. And actually, in terms of impacts, what matters isn't even local absolute sea level, which is shown on the previous slide, but actually local relative sea level, which takes into account not just the sea level itself, but also the vertical land motion in your area, whether your area is actually moving up or down relative to the ocean. So that's what is shown here. One of the themes of the EIS sea level pilot study was from the Greenland ice sheet to your backyard. And so here you're seeing a screenshot from the case study that the team did looking at the impact of sea level change from the melting Greenland ice sheet on the Hampton Roads area in Virginia. And what this is showing is the vertical land motion piece of this analysis. Areas in red are places of negative land motion, meaning that the land is moving down or subsiding in those areas. And areas in blue are places where the land is actually rising. And those red areas are extra sensitive to sea level rise because as the sea is rising, because of things like the Greenland ice sheet thaw you saw before, these areas, the land here is actually moving down. And so in summary, for sea level, we started with global temperature from something like GISTemp, and then related that to Greenland ice sheet melt, then looked at the spatial variability in sea level, and finally brought it down to the level of neighborhoods, as shown here, and even individual blocks within those neighborhoods with this vertical land motion analysis. So that was sea level, and so the second pilot study that we did was related to fires. So here, we are showing a 3-day moving average of fire radiative power from the VIIRS instrument. This highlights really nicely that fires are a global phenomenon, and through our partnership with NOAA, which operates the VIIRS instrument, we have the ability to monitor these active fires at global scales. You can notice that fires occur basically everywhere in the world, and that they're concentrated especially in sub-Saharan Africa, but you also see significant flare-ups in the Amazon, in Siberia, in the western US and Canada, and in Australia. That said, people typically care about the acute local impacts of fires, namely the acute risk to life and property from fires themselves, but also the indirect impacts of smoke from fires on air quality. And so to thoroughly understand fires and their impacts, you need a lot of different kinds of information. Antecedent weather and climate conditions, and land surface properties to understand fire risk, active fire detections, and high-resolution fuel maps to understand where fires are and where they will spread next, and information about the state of the atmosphere over and around a fire to understand how smoke and other fire emissions will influence air quality both in the vicinity of the fire and far away. So here's an example of a capability we developed as part of the EIS fire pilot to address that need. The map on the left is showing the evolution of an individual fire, the LNU lightning complex, which burned in August 2020 in California. Each orange dot is an individual detected fire pixel from the VIIRS 375-meter sensor. The thick red line is showing the current active fire perimeter, and the gray polygon is the cumulative burned area. What's cool is that both of these are generated automatically using a special convex hull algorithm that was developed by our colleagues Yang Chen and Jim Randerson at UC Irvine. Combined with the global reach of the VIIRS instrument, this means we can map active fire perimeters like this anywhere in the world. On the top right, we have a time series of fire weather index, basically an index of meteorological fire risk, calculated from two different data sets, the iMerge precipitation product and output of the GEOS model and data assimilation system. The vertical dashed lines show when the fire actually took place. On the bottom right, you're seeing time series of fire rated power averaged over this entire area from Beers, Modus Terra and Aqua, and GOES 16 and 17. This is zoomed into the 2-week duration of the fire. So a few highlights from this overall slide. First, you can see how this area experienced weeks of continuous fire-prone weather condition before this particular fire actually started. So this area is basically just waiting to ignite. Second, notice how on day 2 of the fire, you had multiple different ignitions that eventually merged into a single huge fire. Those are lightning strikes, the trigger of the fire event. Finally, the thing to take away from the figure on the bottom right is the importance of geostationary observations. Modus and Beers both give you at most 1 to 2 observations of the fire per day. However, the geostationary observations let you monitor the fire every 15 minutes, which reveals some complex temporal patterns that you can't see from just the daily observations. This is especially important for studying what happens to the fire at night. A lot of our models wrongly assume the fire dies down at night and flares back up during the day, when in fact, these geostationary observations show us that the fires continue to burn quite strongly even during the nighttime. And here, we're showing 2 more examples, this time as still images, of the spread trajectory of the Caldor-Dixie fire, which burned just this past year, using the same detection algorithm as before. The red line around each of these is the cumulative burned area, and the colored lines show the evolution of each of these fires through time. Finally, I want to switch gears and talk about the work of the Eis Freshwater Team. Similar to fire, a key theme of the Freshwater Team was integrating multiple different sources of information coming from a variety of NASA models and data to truly understand an event, in this case the 2019 floods in the US Midwest. Basically, what happened with the 2019 floods is summarized here, a perfect storm of confounding factors: high rainfall, rapid snowmelt, flooding, drenched soils, and ultimately delayed planting. In the next few slides, I'll step through each of these factors and the role of NASA capabilities in studying them. First, across much of the Midwest and northern plains, soils were saturated throughout the fall and winter, especially in the Corn Belt. And that's what's shown in this map here, which is showing anomalies in root zone soil moisture from the SMAP instrument from August to October of 2018, with reds indicating dry soils and blues indicating wet soils. And you can see huge swaths of the Midwest in these deep blue colors, indicating wet, saturated soils. On top of that, you had a massive blizzard that rolled through the Midwest in mid-March that blanketed the region in deep snow. And that's what's shown in this animation, which is a visualization of the GPM iMerge precipitation dataset from March 12th through 14th of 2019. During this time, we also saw significant flooding. And so here, we're comparing 2 true color MODIS surface reflectance images of the Missouri River near Omaha, Nebraska. The one on the left is the river in 2015, and on the right is the river in 2019, after all the stuff from the last 2 slides had taken place. And you can see from these pictures quite clearly how the river expands into what almost looks like a lake as it rises to cover its entire floodplain. So from there, a rain-on-snow event on the unusually deep snowpack caused rapid snowmelt, and that further intensified spring flooding. So here, you are seeing a map of snow depth. On the left, on March 10th, before the rain-on-snow event, and on the right, on March 29th, 2 weeks later, after the rain-on-snow event. And you can see how the snow recedes to the north from basically the entire Midwest, and all of that snow led to record flooding. And so the end result of all of this was that come spring and early summer of 2019, soils across the Midwest were too wet to plant crops. So here you're seeing another map of root zone soil moisture anomaly from SMAP, this time averaged over May 27th to June 2nd of 2019. Wet soils again are in blue, dry soils are in red. And this big swath of blue soils across the Midwest, all of this is land that ended up being too wet to plant crops for months. And so the takeaway from all of this is that understanding the flooding in the Midwest in 2019 required combining a large number of NASA data and model products and presenting them together in a narrative that makes sense to policymakers and the public. And that, more broadly, is the vision of the NASAEarth information system, as shown on this cool conceptual diagram from the Freshwater Team. Taking all of NASA's Earth science capabilities, which are already super powerful even by themselves, combining them to do new and interesting science by taking advantage of some of the new capabilities of cloud computing, and finally delivering that science to the people who need it in ways that they can understand. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and wish you an enjoyable rest of your AGU meeting.